Well, it's just over 200 days until the Victorian election, and the state government has rolled the dice on a business-as-usual budget with $1 billion surplus, thanks in part to a new lotteries deal. The Treasurer, Jaclyn Symes, has focused her second budget on services and assistance for Victorians facing the effects of inflation and the war in Iran. But there's little in the budget to stop Victoria's debt from reaching $200 billion. Here's state political reporter Richard Willingham leading our coverage.
Cross those fingers. An early win on budget day. Victoria securing a $1.1 billion deal with lotteries for a 40-year licence extension.
Well, that's incredible.
But Labor's biggest budget gamble is to deliver more of the same.
At a time like this, government should not stand back. It should step in.
Free or discounted public transport, more spending on schools and hospitals, and rego rebates all delivered with a $1 billion surplus. Although that's $900 million less than forecast 6 months ago.
The only surplus on the eastern seaboard.
But the most controversial number? The state's debt, which continues to balloon. It's sitting at $165 billion and forecast to reach nearly $200 billion in 3 years. It remains close to a quarter of the state's economy.
Borrowing for infrastructure is what a strong economy needs. It is an unrealistic expectation for current taxpayers to foot the entire bill for generational infrastructure projects.
Interest repayments this year alone will hit $8.9 billion. That's more than the $6.4 billion raised through land tax.
That could fund police, AMBOs and kindergartens and leave $1 billion left in change.
And that figure only grows. Interest repayments will hit $11.8 billion in 2029-30. That's $32 million every day. Labor is adamant that drastic debt reduction would hurt families. Rating agencies have the government on notice.
The risk is that it becomes unsustainable and there is no, at the moment, path to repayment of that debt.
Jess Wilson is promising to outline her debt plan in coming weeks.
There are tough decisions that need to be made, but we will respect taxpayer money.
There's no new taxes or charges, but there's no tax relief either. There's $13.8 billion on new spending, but few savings, just $607 million over 4 years from further cuts to the public service. Cash from Canberra has helped the state, with greater GST windfalls and support for state projects.
This is a government, when they get extra cash in, they spend it.
The budget leaves little room to move, with experts hoping for bigger surpluses.
The world is a very uncertain place at the moment, and I think the more we have tucked away for a rainy day, the better.
Labor is hoping it doesn't rain on their parade. Richard Willingham, ABC News, Melbourne.
This budget is unlikely to hold many surprises for Victorians. Budget sweeteners like free public transport and discounted car registration were announced weeks ago. Billions more will be poured into education, hospitals and the justice system as the government tries to calm community concern about crime.
Applauded from within, but not everyone's buying Treasurer Jaclyn Symes' pitch.
The biggest cost of living measure is housing affordability, and there is very little in this budget that addresses that.
There's always so much more to be done. I'm not going to cut short on that. There's always more to be done.
It really seems that the budget papers are on Ozempic when it comes to what's coming out to regional Victoria.
With an election looming, the government's pouring $1.7 billion into the justice system, including $229 million to increase capacity in the state's prison system, $81 million to reduce youth crime, and $222 million to the police force, including recruiting 200 reservists. $3 million will also go towards a long overdue review of the state's sentencing laws.
A clear, concise and consistent act will be critical for community expectations in the future.
We don't need a review to tell us that Victorians think that consequences are out of line with community expectations.
$1.6 billion will go towards building new schools and campuses, while $541 million will boost early childhood education programs and build more kindergartens. But it's the government's funding for teachers and classroom resources that's received a failing grade.
Our schools today remain the lowest funded in the country, and today the budget does nothing to address that.
The budget provides $3.9 billion in new funding for the state's health system and $2.5 billion for disability supports. The government's also extended stamp duty concessions for all off-the-plan purchases for the next 6 months. But there's no broader relief on property and payroll taxes, which will net the state more than $30 billion in the next year.
Today's state budget is unfortunately a missed opportunity.
We're extremely disappointed with this budget.
Budgets are all about choice, and unfortunately business was not chosen today.
For weeks, the government's promoted initiatives like extended free public transport and rebates on car registrations, leaving few announcements for Budget Day. It's banking on Victorians remembering these sweeteners and not the state's debt in the lead up to the election. Leanne Wong, ABC News, Melbourne.
State political reporter Rich Willingham joins me now. Rich, how much of this is about the election?
I think a lot of this is about the election. This budget designed to do no harm to households. In fact, the government wants to help Victorians with these series of cost of living measures we've seen rolled out over the past month. This is a pitch to voters that the government is on their side. Now, Labor hopes Victorians focus more on their home budget and these quick sugar hits rather than the macro details of Victoria's $200 billion of debt. It's also less concerned about what businesses think. The Premier's banking on most voters not being worried about that state debt, especially younger generations who use debt to fund their own lives. The risk is that too much debt stops governments from doing the basics, and this is the trap for Jacinta Allen. She says Labor can do both right now and doesn't want to rip out services at a time of need. It's also taking the very easy path now because the election is in November. It puts a lot of pressure on Jess Wilson, though, to come up with a credible plan to tackle debt while not making cuts. Labor is essentially waiting for her to do that, and it's central to her campaign. We've heard this language in recent weeks. Now, the rating agencies have given the budget a qualified pass mark, but note there's little room for error and they're urging against an election splurge. But Ben, this budget sets aside tens of billions of dollars for future announcements, so I think not spending that might be wishful thinking.
We'll be watching. Thanks, Richard.